Hello, everyone. This is Luis Morinigo from New Signature. We are currently admitting people into the meeting and should be getting started within the next couple minutes. Okay, everyone, I think we can get started. Um, Good afternoon again. I'm Luis Morinigo. Online
You
with
will
me.
now be placed into conference. To mute your line, press star 6. To unmute, press pound 6.
Hi, good afternoon. Hi. Sorry about that. I was just having some hiccups here. I'm Luis Morinigo. I work for New Signature. With me, I have Cooper Drummond, who will be sort of supporting all of the questions on the back end of this link webinar. I also have some other New Sig folks here on the line. But welcome to this webinar. Before we get started, I just want to make sure that everyone can see my screen. If you cannot see my screen, please let us know. Just type it in, and Cooper will let me know, and we can move forward from there. Um, the presentation today is approximately 45 minutes, maybe 50, with a good bit of questions at the end, around 10 to 15 minutes. I would appreciate if we could manage the questions through the link conversation. So if you do have a question, please feel free to type it in. I am presenting full screen, so I will not be able to answer the questions immediately, but Cooper will keep track of them, and then at the end we can tackle each one. If there are questions that we cannot tackle in this time frame, we will answer them by email. So we'll get back to you at the end of that. So I do appreciate that. A little bit of introduction. So I've been working with New Signature for a little over 2 years now. I'm a strategy consultant. My main focus is on strategy and business automation. I'm responsible for integrating systems and solutions, but also taking sort of the approach of business requirements gathering, financial analysis, and overall strategic assessments before we sort of move into the heavy technical side of things. Um, my prior experience is sort of very relevant to what we're going to talk today about. Um, my previous life, I was an associate at JP Morgan in London. I worked in capital markets, and I just was really focused on analyzing capital raising deals, particularly in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe. Um, from a background perspective, academic background perspective, I studied math and economics at the University of Maryland. I did a master's at LSE. So I like my numbers and I like my analysis, particularly around sort of analyzing what are the impacts of certain decisions when it comes to technology, implementations. Um, the agenda for today is sort of broken down into 4 areas. I'm going to present an overview of the methods and sort of the TEI methodology that Forrester uses, and TEI stands for Total Economic Impact. This presentation walks through this methodology and focuses on how to tailor the framework for specific scenarios. So a lot of times what happens is we read these incredible white papers and we have um, a lot of insight into a study that's been accomplished, but it's sort of challenging to take what we read and tailor it to our specific needs. And Forrester's TEI methodology enables us to capture assumptions and requirements and metrics and sort of drill down to that area where we can start to estimate costs and potential benefits. And so that's the interesting part of this, is that beyond the white paper, beyond the analysis, there is a real use to this framework. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the overview, and then we'll work from there. The approach expands from that and talks about sort of where in the world of analysis this type of work or this type of process falls in. So a lot of times we'll hear organizations talk about, before we do an implementation, we have to do a full-on discovery. That's great, but within the discovery, what is contained in the discovery is there's business requirements, there's use cases, there's roadmap analysis, there's a lot of different things, and what we sometimes don't incorporate is a heavy financial analysis onto what are the potential costs and benefits from moving from one solution to another. And so this is where that particular so the TEI approach is where it falls into sort of the discovery world. Then we'll talk a little bit about requirements, like general requirements for unified communications. So if we are comparing an incumbent solution to Lync, we need to look at the overall capabilities of unified communications, because the incumbent solution may only address one or two capabilities within unified communications, and so we're looking at a multiple set of solutions that need to be assessed along with in comparison to Lync. And then we're going to talk about actually deriving these benefits and costs, and this is where we get into the more granular analysis of this entire approach. The second to last area is using financial metrics to understand what the investment opportunity looks like. So some of these may be familiar. If you're a project manager, you've seen internal rate of return, or you've seen the payback period. You've seen some other internal rate of return. If you're looking at comparing multiple projects, return on investment is ROI, net benefits is benefits minus costs, and the risk adjustments are really the interesting part of understanding your business. If you know your business inside and out, and you are analyzing each line item and understanding that certain cost estimates are less known than others, that's where you would adjust to capture that. And so I'll talk a little bit about that as well. And finally, back to my beginning point, is we're looking at a framework that can be utilized for specific scenarios. So I'll talk a little bit about what we can do to customize the model for a specific situation. So those are the four areas, and I'll just go through and talk bit by bit. You'll notice that as I move from one agenda item to the other, in the top right corner, you will see a little breadcrumb that will remind you which section we're in. So, first things first, we'll talk about what Forrester says. So, the total economic approach developed by Forrester derived sort of this composite organization based on an analysis of 5 companies. And they also did a survey for 7 companies. So, essentially what they did is they got very deep and very specific with 5 companies, and then for those for extra information, they went out and gathered a survey on 7 of them. The composite organization is an organization that they created based on the results of this analysis, and they had the following characteristics. Number 1, it was an international organization. Number 2, it was about 4,000 users. And the third point is that the pain points that they had was that their costs were too high, the current solution was not meeting their collaboration demands of the business, they were relying on multiple solutions to deliver a unified communications experience, and it was cumbersome and inefficient. The infrastructure upgrades were required in the short term, so they were sort of in that decision point where they needed to say, do we invest in our current legacy solution, or do we invest in something else? The highlight from this analysis is that Forrester estimated the composite organization's 3-year benefits to be around $7 million and its costs to be around $3.5 million. What you see next on the slides are those financial metrics that I talked about in the agenda slide. You see ROI, you see IRR, you see the NPV, the payback periods. These were derived based on the assumptions and the analysis from the Forrester model, and we will revisit these metrics towards the end of the presentation. I'll show you how these were calculated. The key takeaway that I want to emphasize here is that, again, this approach can be fundamental for helping organizations understand their decisions to move to Lync. So we can use this assessment in the discovery phase to help that decision process. Forrester has provided the framework, and organizations like us, like New Signature, derive the inputs for this framework based on specific requirements and the financials of a company. So in other words, this framework is flexible enough to capture almost any scenario, and we do the due diligence to be able to derive the assumptions and the analysis behind that. So most of the heavy lifting is focused on capturing and analyzing the breadth and depth of the organization's costs, prioritizing cost numbers so that we stay focused on what matters. So that means that most organizations have a lot of information, so it's very important to continue to ask yourself, what is the highest priority and what's most important for our decision associated with this particular solution. Aligning strategic goals to this assessment, for example, it'd be important to understand that the organization you're working with, if they were to expand nationally or if they were to expand more internationally. So it's important to know those types of what's sort of the strategic roadmap of an organization going forward. And then the final heavy lifting point is deriving the inputs that drive the financial model based on realistic assumptions. So assumptions are always a tough one, and we encounter them in project management as well when we have to estimate the amount of time it takes to do a certain task. This is a very similar function here. So, for example, estimating the growth period, or estimating how many roles will be consolidated into one role based on a functional consolidation of tasks. So one person with Lync, for example, you could see that you used to have 3 people doing task A, and now you only need 1 to do task A. And so those are the type of assumptions that you would have to work through. The final bit of this slide on the bottom there, you see that these are the 3 areas of improvement that were the results of the survey from the 7. Hi, is everyone, can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Where was I lost? Okay. Okay. 2 minutes ago. Um, okay. I can go back for 1 second. I don't know what happened there, but essentially what I reviewed was the uh, uh, the metrics here, the ROI all the way down to the payback period, and the final point I wanted to say was that um, we we had we saw improvements in access to information. We saw improvements from better support to remote workers, and we saw an increase in reliability and performance. And those were the results of the surveys completed for the 7 companies. And I also talked a little bit about the heavy lifting part of this analysis. So you have this framework, and the heavy lifting is really focused on capturing and analyzing the large amount of an organization's costs. So there's information all over the place, and then it's very important to really wrap your head around it and prioritize it so that you know what you're trying to highlight into the model. And then aligning the goals of an organization to this assessment. So you need to understand what the roadmap strategically of the organization is. So if for example, an organization was looking to expand internationally, you would need to know that information. Finally, deriving inputs that drive the financial model based on realistic assumptions. As I mentioned before, I think I was on mute. We make assumptions all the time when we focus on creating projects from a project management perspective. We estimate the number of hours that tasks will take, and this is sort of the same exercise we're going through here. We need to make those assumptions so that we can derive the individual line items from this assessment. Next slide. Okay. We talked about in the previous slide how the derived benefits were roughly $7 million and the costs were roughly 3.5 million. The biggest benefits came from staff optimizations. This is a reduction or consolidation of redundant functions, and what's sort of the advantage of using Link to sort of have one point of contact somewhere that can do 2 or 3 times more than what was previously in place. The biggest cost came from internal labor. The initial internal labor implementation cost was roughly 200,000, and the ongoing internal support for Link is also included here. And then this was followed by the support license costs, which includes the Link 2013 plus Cal license over 3 years. Again, these are all the generic Forrester results. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, it's very important to baseline what the high-level capabilities for unified communications is, so we can map the current solution and say, does the current solution meet all of these capabilities, yes or no? If they don't, then we have to find out what other solutions are currently doing that, so that we can consolidate all of them and compare that to what Link can do. So these are pretty straightforward, and yeah, go to the next one. So now I'm going to talk about the approach. So you'll notice that the way that Forrester's methodology works is that they'll have perform due diligence, conduct interviews and gather requirements, construct financial model, and using the TI framework and writing the case study. For today's presentation, I'm only focusing on the first middle two chevrons, conducting interviews and constructing the financial model. As mentioned back in 2 slides, it is really important to remember that TEI is a framework and not a calculator. Each organization is different and requires an exercise to identify the benefits and costs. We usually do this assessment early in a phase 0 or what we call a discovery phase, when an organization is deciding whether to invest in the current solution or to switch to Link. We will be focusing again on the majority of this conversation will be on these 2 chevrons, but heavily focused on the financial model aspect of it. So, what are the requirements for unified communications? So these are sort of the generic examples of business requirements associated with unified communications. Most organizations find a heavy focus on cost reduction. So I'll focus this analysis on this topic. This is why it's very important to incorporate the TEI in the discovery phase, because that's the phase where you are capturing these business requirements. And so these business requirements drive the areas of analysis that will make up the benefits and the costs. Soft benefits are a little bit challenging to derive, but they're still feasible. So soft benefits are sort of associated with productivity gains. Forrester in this model focuses only on cost reduction as a benefit and not on soft benefits. But soft benefits are still very feasible to derive. So some examples of soft benefits are Lync gives more flexibility so we can change our meetings on the fly. Or another example is flexible working is the biggest benefit we've realized. So those are some of the quotes that were that Forrester sort of put together through their analysis. But below that you'll see some of the reasons why companies were looking for a solution. What companies were looking for the solution. Excuse me, I'm having some throat issues here. But we saw that these companies were looking for a life cycle replacement. They were looking for improved mobility, and they were looking for lower total cost of ownership. And soft benefits is usually what gets people excited, but also it's sort of a potentially a hard to balance, because you need to understand your assumptions, and you need to get down to a level that's granular enough to be able to turn those soft benefits into something digestible. And it's certainly, this model allows that to happen. Okay, so before we derive the TEI model, these are the assumptions I've put together. I tweaked the assumptions of the Forrester report to show how this model can adjust to specific scenarios. My assumptions for the composite organization are listed here. One main difference from the Forrester report is that I did not include telephony costs, which mostly focused on international long-distance costs, because the assumption of my composite organization is that it's a U.S.-based organization. Another tweak in the model that I adjusted was around the FTEs, and I'll get to those in when we start deriving the costs. Essentially, I used different numbers of FTEs separate from what Forrester was using, and I increased the number of users from 4,000 to 5,000. The on-premises 2003 solution that this is based off consists of an upgrade to 2013 Plus, the Plus Cal, on top of the existing Lync and Outlook licenses already included in the Enterprise Cal Suite and Office Professional Plus solutions. Those were already deployed. The implementation of highly availability, so this is a very important topic that we saw throughout the report, so I've included it here. And 70% of the users, of the 5,000 users, would have a headset, and 30% would use the IP desk phones. So, what are the benefits and costs? As you can see here, we've got a list of benefits and costs, and I will only focus on the eliminated PBX and web conferencing costs as a benefit, and then this concept of staff optimization. Not included are soft benefits, but we certainly could have. We would need more assessment and more richer information to be able to do that. But generally, they're involved with increases in user productivity and team efficiency. Flexibility is sort of this concept of I invest in additional capacity or capabilities so that I can turn that amount into business benefit for future additional investments. So it's sort of like I'm more efficient now. I can use the the gains from my efficiency to reinvest into other areas of the business that can become more efficient. Those two concepts were not included in benefits. Costs. We have implementation labor, so that's internal resources that are helping with the implementation process. Professional costs, those are consulting firms that are helping with the implementation. Hardware costs, software licenses, and additional bandwidth. And the additional bandwidth has to do with that high availability that we talked about in the previous slide. Okay, finally, we get down to deriving benefits and costs. So the first benefit is eliminating PBX and web conferencing costs. So you'll notice that the way that this is structured is we have a reference number, and this is important because as the model continues to grow and grow and grow and get larger, it's very important to have these reference numbers here so that we can always work back and see how calculations were derived. So in this case, we have A1 to A3, and you'll notice that we have a calculation here. AT naught, eliminated PBX and web conferencing costs, that's the fourth row down. That's the sum of the first three rows. And we do that from the initial point of time to year 3. Now we talked about risk earlier, risk adjustment. So the risk adjustment here is this concept of we are pretty certain that these are going to be the costs, but there's still a risk that they may not be, that they may not really be these costs. So we've incorporated a risk adjustment of 10%. So we have to reduce the benefit by 10% as a result of this risk adjustment. And the risk adjustments can change for each benefit or each line item. You could have a risk adjustment associated with each line item. And we've seen that a lot. So if I don't think that the avoided one-time PBX costs is really realistic, I can add 30% reduction to that, and then keep the 10% reductions for A2 and A3. So the key takeaways here are that we avoided the one-time PBX upgrade, so that's the reinvestment into the legacy system, which costs around $200,000. And we reduced the annual PBX, which is the maintenance, for $50,000, and we eliminated the web conferencing solution, which had the license of $100,000, and then $50,000 as users were taken off the system. Second benefit, staff optimization. So now what we're dealing with is this concept of efficiency. So we talked a little bit about productivity, and we talked about how that's a soft benefit. You could argue in a way that we are capturing that here because we're saying one person only needs to cover 3 or 4 resources because of Lync, and so that you would be able to call that productivity. But this is more in terms of sort of administrative positions. So from a technical perspective, how many people are required to manage how many people are required to essentially manage the old PBX solution so that you don't have to deal with that anymore. You could remove the positions and you can put them into other positions. It's not necessarily the same as productivity in the sense that if I'm a resource that is working on a task and I'm using Lync, and then I can do 3 or 4 times more work or I can access 3 or more times more information than I could before by talking to colleagues or by running web conferences or what have you. Those costs are not associated with this. This is around sort of the system administration side of things. So what does it take to support the system, the old system versus the new system? So as you can see here, it's the same structure. We've got the reference numbers, the metrics, calculations, and then years 1 through 3. The key takeaways are that there were local admins across 2 satellite offices, 1 main office, and system administration could be done in a more centralized way. So overall, there was an 11 FTE position reduction, and this is where I sort of worked with the FTEs and had different numbers than Forrester's numbers, just to show that these sort of concepts were still the same. IT support desk was removed, so that resulted in 25 FTE positions. 4 eliminated in year 1, 7 eliminated in year 2, and 8 eliminated in year 3. All of that back-end calculation is in an Excel spreadsheet that I was able to derive and put together and sort of translate it into PowerPoint. So these are just the high-level points of how these numbers came about. So total benefits, we have, if you recall, I said that the total benefits of the Forrester's composite organization was around $7 million. In this case, we're seeing about $4 million in benefits. And the tweak here was the difference between Forrester and this is that no telephony costs were taken into account here, and the FTE numbers were different. And the number of users were different, but those won't come in until the cost estimates are taken into account. So what you see here is that we basically align these two benefits together, add them up, and look at what their total value is and their their present value as well. So keep this in mind as we compare it to costs. We'll have a consolidated table that compares the two. Now moving to costs. Remember I said that there were 5 cost areas. The first one is the implementation labor, and this is associated with the effort to implement Lync. So right now, you'll notice that we have more granularity here, and this is what we usually like to see when we're deriving costs or and benefits as well. But in this case, we're assessing the number of weeks for proof of concept, for setup, for geographic rollout. It's very similar to a project plan. So those numbers should align to what is being sort of thought about in a project perspective. And then we start deriving other things like how many FTEs, what is the cost per week, what is the total implementation costs, and then what is the ongoing support costs, and what is the internal labor and the internal ongoing support costs. So there's a lot of different line items here that we've broken down. And when I was talking about getting that assumptions were very important, this is what I'm talking about, is that you could say, well, how long does the proof of concept really take? Does it take 5 weeks or 3 weeks, 4 weeks or 3 weeks? And so that type of analysis is what really drives the quality of this framework. So the better the input, the better the output. But what this framework does is it does allow you to think about all of the elements associated with a decision. And that's very important, because if you have it down in front of you on paper and you know all of the line items that go into costs, benefits, and you do your best to assume what the derived values are, you're 90% there. I mean, you're seeing a comprehensive global view of what this investment is going to look like, and that's very important. So although it's critical to think about assumptions and the values that you're using to derive these line items, it's very important. It's also you don't have to get them perfect, and I'll make that point at the very end, but just something to keep in mind as we move forward. Again, we have the risk adjustment here of 10%. So the difference is that with costs, we are adding this 10% because it is a cost is a negative value. So we don't know if these costs may be higher, but what we're saying here is that we think they might be 10% higher in reality, but there's a window, right? It could be 5%, 3%, 7%, but generally it won't be more than 10% higher. And so we increase that number of the cost number based on this risk adjustment, the risk adjustment. The second cost area includes implementation and ongoing support with regards to professional services like consulting firms. Very simple. We have the same setup here, and in this case, we risk adjusted by 5% because we're pretty confident that we know the generally the cost of consulting services and training and support. So in this case, our risk adjustment is less than the one before, but we still increase the total amount. Okay, hardware costs. So again, we make a list of all of the hardware costs associated with the Lync implementation, and we show what calculation we're conducting for each, and that's why that calculation column is very important, because it also adds it incorporates sort of an audit trail of what you're doing for each step. And I'm not going to go into too much detail here, except for the fact that we have 5% risk adjustments here. Again, similar to the professional costs, we're pretty sure we know roughly what a server costs, so we're not going to be too concerned about this cost escalating to something that's 10% higher. So we have that there, and then we include the total hardware cost by adding all of these up. And so once again, this model allows you to think about every aspect of cost, and so it's a great exercise to start working down and getting as granular as possible. Second to last is software licensing. The key point here is that the organization that we assumed already owned the Enterprise Cal Suite along with Office Professional Plus, which includes Office Outlook and Lync clients. So what they need is the Lync 2013 plus Cal. This is where we would see the most variation between organizations. A lot of times we have questions of, what is the total Lync implementation cost? And I think that we see most of the variation. We see most of the variation here because the licensing is very specific to the organization. So what you'll see is that, again, we've got the calculation column, and we've got the initial costs, year 1, year 2, year 3. In this case, we have a risk adjustment. Excuse me, I jumped the gun there. We have a risk adjustment of 0 because we are absolutely certain of these software licensing costs. So we keep the same risk adjustment amount, and that enables us to complete the fourth area of costs. Finally, software licenses. This is a typo. This actually should say additional bandwidth. So I apologize for that, but the additional bandwidth has to do with the high availability, and we are adjusting the risk at 5% for this. So what happens at the end? We've got all these total costs. We have our 5 areas here on the left. We add them all up, and we'll see that we have exactly the same amount of costs that we saw in, well, a little bit lower actually, because Forrester had a $3.58 million in costs, and we have 3.525. So almost the same costs derived our way. So now into the metrics. The financial summary will show a summary of all the risk adjustments and what those risk adjustments were related to. So in the case of benefits, we had 10% across the board, and we would adjust those benefits down. And then for costs, we would adjust those the risks up. If the risk adjustment values were done at a line item level, so if you recall, eliminated PBX and web conferencing costs had The first line item, I believe, was A1. If you decided to do the risk adjustment at that level, then this table would show all of the risk adjustments associated with each line item that it was associated to. Um, so it's a summary of all of that. And finally, we've got the financial summary on the bottom with our costs, our benefits, our return on investment, our internal rate of return, and our payback in months. So our ROI is basically a measure of our project's expected return in percentage terms. It's just calculated by deriving the net benefits minus the costs. You'll notice that the rest of the metrics here are help us sort of make a decision about a go or no go about in relation to the investment. As you can see here, again, the telephony benefits were removed, and there was no inclusion of soft benefits. The investment to Link over the incumbent is an obvious choice, even despite the fact that we took out a major benefit from the reduction in telephony costs and the fact that we did not include soft benefits. So by not including those, this is still a strong investment opportunity. And we kept the cost pretty much constant. So we reduced the benefits from the original Forrester model. We got down to $4 million, and then we kept the cost the same, roughly $3.5 million, and it still turns out to be a stronger investment. The ROI is 77%. The internal rate of return is 34%, and that's associated to the interest rate that will bring the series of these cash flows, which are to the net present value of 0. So it's pretty much the rate at which the investment breaks even. The payback period is 28 months. So that's when you'll start to see between the initial period and year one, you will see the return there. So again, it's a good story. I think that with having taken out, not including productivity and the other factors, this is a strong case. And when you do include soft productivity gains, it will allow even more opportunity to show a higher ROI and higher internal rate of return and higher payback periods as well. So it's just something to keep in mind, and although it's a little bit more challenging to derive, it's certainly worth it. So how do you customize the economic model? These are the chevrons that I showed in the second slide that were associated with performing the due diligence, conducting the interviews, constructing the financial model, and then writing the case study. So the due diligence is really around capturing as much data as possible. And then once you have that data, and once you've talked to sort of the owners of the data, and once you have an understanding of the overall strategy of the organization, conducting interviews and gathering business requirements is extremely important. So in the discovery phase, many times we'll have users speak to technical individuals that will talk about business requirements, and so this is where that function of capturing business requirements and the total economic impact approach meet. And we can capture here budgetary constraints, and it's the inventory of all of the data and also the understanding of the business requirements that will allow for the derivation of very strong assumptions. So that leads us into the third point, which is creating tailored and realistic assumptions that derive the values for each line item associated with benefits and costs. Once you have the first 2 points, and once you've performed the due diligence, conducted the interviews, you have a pretty clear understanding of what are the priorities, where is the the most important data living, and how can I work with that. Then you create the assumptions, and then you start generating this the financial calculations on the back end. And then writing a case study, this is where again we see this merging of an activity in the discovery phase, such as developing a high level roadmap, meeting the financial assessment. And so we would integrate the two so that the hours associated with the implementation and the sort of estimated professional cost and the people associated with the implementation from outside the organization, all those things would be calculated and integrated into this roadmap. So that's how you would fit these requirements that are unique to an organization into this approach. Okay, we have about 13 minutes left, and I'd like to open it up to questions. Okay, looks like we have no questions. Hope I provided the information that is compelling and interesting. All right. I think that we can call it early, and thanks everyone for your time. I really appreciate it. If you do think of any questions or any comments, please email. You can email me or Cooper. I don't know if you might not have my email. You might have it through this webinar, but we can coordinate with Cooper and go from there. Thank you very much.